It has happened. Some people might yell out, as in the glorious tune in Munchkin Land, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." But Kathleen Kennedy is no longer, it's official now. It's not just the report that we covered last week. It's official. Kathleen Kennedy has stepped down as the president of Lucasfilm, and she's out. Now, we've talked a lot about her leaving. We just talked about that last week and all that kind of stuff. And you guys know for 5 or 6 years, I've been banging the drum of, while will always be a big fan of Kathleen Kennedy. She's one of the greatest producers in Hollywood history. You're a straight up moron if you don't acknowledge that. Just look at her resume. It's better than just about anybody else's in history. She's great, but just because you're a good movie producer does not mean you're a good studio head. And I gave all the trust in the world to George Lucas. George handpicked personally. He handpicked personally Kathleen Kennedy to take the job. And I, like everybody else, I thought that was a good choice at the time. But, it just became clear very quickly that being a great producer is not the same thing as being a good studio head. And for about 5 or 6 years, I've been saying she needs to go. A lot of people have been saying she needs to go. But having covered all the reasons why she needs to be gone, there is always two sides to every coin. And I thought that we would take a couple of minutes here. I thought it would be appropriate today to be intelligent and sit back and look at some of the actual victories, some of the wins, some of the high points, because you're straight up just have your head in the sand and completely biased if you don't acknowledge that there were victories and there were high points along the way. Even as somebody who's been saying for half a decade that she needs to go, even I will say, yeah, there were a number of high points. There were a number of wins. They didn't outpace the losses, but I thought we would talk about some of those losses. So I want to start with, obviously, just very quickly here, what some of the low points were. I mean, obviously to me, I have said this for years and years and years and years. The biggest problem that Kathleen Kennedy faced being the head of Lucasfilm was the fact that she could not do the two most important things that the head of the studio needs to do. Number one, be on, get on, and identify when you and your filmmakers are on the same page. It became a circus, Rob, of the constant rotating door. It's become an ongoing running joke about the 75 announced Star Wars projects that either just never happened or they started to make them and then Kathleen Kennedy and the filmmakers discovered they weren't on the same page. It's like, shouldn't you figure that out before you started shooting? The Lord and Miller situation is a great example of that. Then whether it was Taika Waititi's thing or even Kevin Feige's thing or Benioff and Weiss's thing or the this, the that, and the other thing and all this kind of stuff. She was simply a studio head that could never get on the same page creatively with her own filmmakers. And that, to me, is the one deadly sin. You cannot do that and be the head of the studio. So that was the one thing. The second thing was she very clearly failed to launch her era of Star Wars with a plan. There was no plan. It was all, let's just kind of take it as we go. And that became painfully obvious by the time we got to The Rise of Skywalker. And then even more painfully obvious by the time that after The Rise of Skywalker was done, we are now sitting on year 6, going into year 7, since we've had a Star Wars movie in theaters. You cannot be the head of the Lucasfilm studio and have that be the case. Now, then we can go into all the various projects that failed. Solo was a pretty good movie, to be honest with you. I'll argue anybody about that. I thought it was a pretty good movie, but it's a movie that never should have been made, at least not at the time. Then you got various shows that just never, shows like Acolyte, shows like Obi-Wan, shows, and I understand those shows will have their fans as well, in all respect, if that's the case for you. But for me, these were all things that could have been great, ended up being terrible. And don't even get me going on Rise of Skywalker, because I could be here for the next hour just waxing poetic about that. But you guys have heard me say all these things for years. So on the day that we are all kind of, the world is embracing the fact that Kathleen Kennedy's now left, let's do the other thing. Let's look at some of the wins. Let's look at some of the things that went well, shall we? And I'm going to start with coming out of the gate, Phantom Menace. I know Phantom Menace isn't the biggest win for everybody, but the reality was I got a real kick as one of the world's biggest Star Wars obsessed guys on the planet. I got a real kick out of the movie. I really enjoyed it. Not nearly as good
Phantom. You said Phantom Menace.
Oh my God, I meant The Force Awakens.
Okay,
like she's been around for a long time.
Yeah, man.
Thank you so much for correcting me on that.
I'm just like,
Force
wait,
Awakens. Force Awakens comes out. Yeah, Phantom Menace is another story altogether. But Force Awakens comes out because everybody today, guys, everybody today likes to rewrite history. Everybody is doing what, the Texas legislature is doing and trying to wipe out actual history and whitewash it. Everybody likes to pretend that there was the original trilogy and then everything has been completely fine until The Force Awakens came along. Guys, Kathleen Kennedy took over a Star Wars that was still in massive recovery mode from the prequels. The prequels, as everybody forgets history and tries to rewrite history today, were an abomination and they were a disaster. They spurred overreactions from people saying like, George Lucas killed my childhood. George Lucas never killed your childhood. Okay, he made 3 bad movies, but he did not kill your childhood. But I still remember the newscast guys, fans coming out of the theaters of The Phantom Menace had gone in all in cosplay. And I remember these national news coming out of theaters, taking off their Jedi robes and burning them on sidewalks, taking out their costumes and throwing them in the garbage and crying about how that was the prequels. And that people forget that it was in that environment that Kathleen Kennedy a few years later took over Star Wars. And to this day, guys, Star Wars, The Force Awakens is still not Avengers Endgame, not an Avatar film. Star Wars The Force Awakens is the #1 US box office film of all time. Still to this day, it is that. Now, they all went downhill after that. There's no denying. It just went downhill after that. But we're here to give credit where credit is due. And she successfully kicked off a new era of Star Wars. Didn't stay good, but it kicked off well, and I want to give her credit for that. But that brings me, guys, to what I think is the biggest win that she had. John Favreau himself told this story. I was in the room at Star Wars Celebration, at D23. I was there in Anaheim, in the auditorium at D23, when John Favreau was out on stage and talking about The Mandalorian. And yeah, Mandalorian season 3, not so good. But let's not forget, seasons 1 and 2 were like the one thing that kind of unified the Star Wars fandom for a long time. And John Favreau on stage telling the story of, like, I remember walking into Kathleen Kennedy's office, she had a stack of pitches for new shows. And she saw something in mine. She saw something that could work in Mandalorian. But then he also went on to reveal, he said, so I went in to meet with Kathleen again, and she said, but here's the thing, John Favreau. Here's the thing, John. I want you to work with our guy, Dave Filoni. I think you and Dave Filoni would work really well together on this. And I think he can bring something to this that'll flesh it out even more and make it even better. And John Favreau said it was Kathleen Kennedy that matched me and Dave Filoni up. Because me and Dave knew each other already, but it was Kathleen Kennedy, said John Favreau, that put Dave and I together to make Mandalorian. Out of all the pitches she had, she saw that was special, and the rest was history. And I think in all the crapping that I do on the era of Kathleen Kennedy and her leadership and poor leadership of Lucasfilm, I think it's important that we also give her flowers. And that was a brilliant move. And it's been one of Star Wars's biggest successes since she took it over. Even though she had $4 billion films. Out of the 5 films she put out in theaters, 4 of them were $1 billion films. One of them was a $2 billion film, and still to this day, the highest grossing US box office film in history. So you got to give it up to her for matching her and Filoni, or Favreau and Filoni together, for picking Mandalorian, for getting that going, all that kind of stuff. Also, big credit for what was Rogue One and then what became the best Star Wars thing ever created since the original trilogy, Andor. And really getting behind that, bringing in the right creative talent to do it, really supporting it, bringing it back for season 2, even though season 1 didn't have a lot of viewership numbers. The viewership in season 2 obviously went up a lot, but became the first Star Wars show ever, guys, to actually be nominated for the highest honor in television, Best Drama Series at the Emmys. And so in the midst of all the failures that we have talked ad nauseum about for many years, I thought it was important today to at least take a moment and give the credit where credit is due for some of the high points. And by the way, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the two people that are taking over for her now at Lucasfilm, she picked them. She, a few years ago, elevated Dave Filoni to Chief Creative Officer. She elevated him in the ranks. And now she picked him to be one of her successors. And we'll cover that in a little bit later on. Anyway, Rob, we spend many years, we've been talking about all the things that have been going wrong with Star Wars and how, hey, great producer, but not a great studio head. Kathleen Kennedy needs to go. We've been saying that for years.
Guys, we want to take a second to thank a sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. The new year doesn't require a new you, maybe just a less burdened you. Most of us carry around things like pressure, self-doubt, or that feeling that we always have to be perfect, and learning to let some of that go can make a huge difference in our lives. Therapy can help you better understand what's weighing you down by giving you an unbiased perspective on your relationships, motivations, and emotions. That's where BetterHelp comes in. See, BetterHelp connects you with quality therapists who are fully licensed in the US and follow a strict professional code of conduct. They also do the matching work for you. You fill out a short questionnaire, and with over 12 years of experience and industry-leading match rates, they usually get it right the first time. And if you ever want to switch therapists, you can do that easily from their tailored recommendations. BetterHelp is also one of the world's largest online therapy platforms, plus an average 4.9 out of 5 rating from over 1.7 million live session reviews. BetterHelp makes it easy to match online with a qualified therapist. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/Campea. That's BetterHelp.com/Campea.
But putting you on the seat now, okay, she's now gone. Let's give her credit where credit is due. Where would you point to some things that might be considered amongst all the lowlights, but some of the things that you might consider some of the highlights of her tenure and her era at Lucasfilm?
Well, as much as I'm loath to admit it, you have to say that The Force Awakens, bringing Star Wars back in grand fashion, was a huge triumph. And there was a lot of people that were incredibly excited about it. The fervor of that, the lead up to that film was incredible, and as much as I am not a big fan of J.J. Abrams, I understand why he was hired. I think it was a canny move to hire him at the time. You had John Williams coming back to score it. There was a lot to love. There was a lot to love about The Force Awakens, and that was a huge triumph for them. I think Carrie Fisher's death, and I think a lot of what went on. Look, I think the biggest mistake that was made by Disney when they acquired Lucasfilm is they didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't up to Lucasfilm to have a plan. It was up for Disney to have the plan. They bought the company, and they were just expecting, as so many people do, that the brand name will magically make them money. The same was true of Marvel and Disney Plus. Let's expect Disney Plus and Star Wars we don't know what they're going to make yet, but we just expect them to drive our business. And I think the lack of synergy between Disney and Lucasfilm, and like you said, making a plan, was a huge mistake. You don't spend $4 billion and not have a plan. So I think that the dysfunction with Star Wars began before they even acquired Disney, before Disney acquired Star Wars. But obviously Force Awakens was a triumph. And you have to say, look, I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. I think Last Jedi was a triumph too. Made over $1.3 billion. It was never going to make the $2 billion that Star Wars Force Awakens made, but it was still an interesting film. I think if Rise of Skywalker paid off what was happening in Last Jedi, and you had a satisfying conclusion that could have brought all of those threads together instead of a weird recobbled together version of, I don't know what Rise of Skywalker was, but it certainly wasn't very fulfilling. I think it could have been a really effective trilogy. And I blame J.J. Abrams for that more than I would blame Kathleen Kennedy. I think that the writing was a problem. I mean, Kathleen Kennedy she's not somebody who got in the way of her creatives. I mean, the people, if you look at her track record for 40 years, it's impeccable in terms of who she worked with, but she facilitated those people's creativity. She didn't get in the way of it. So I think the problem was there was no synergy between Disney and Star Wars. But anyway,
but as a studio head, wouldn't you say it's your job to get in the way of it when it needs to? Like this, that's the difference between I think a producer and being like a Kevin Feige or a Kathleen Kennedy. You're the head of the studio. Like you're the person who has to be the grown-up in the room and recognize when something's going the wrong direction. And it is your job to interfere with your creatives if things are going off the rails, don't you think?
Not really. I mean, you don't see
really.
Look, when I was working at Warner Brothers, Bob Daly and Terry Semel, who ran Warner Brothers at the time, did not get in the way of the filmmakers once that ship had left or the dock or that train had left the station, because studio heads are not the people that are making the movies. They consult with the people that are. And Kathleen Kennedy was a great producer, but she's not a creative producer. I don't believe she ever had a credit as a story. Did she ever come up with? I don't think she ever had a story credit on anything. So she was somebody that provided what her filmmakers needed to make their movies. But I don't think she's not a writer. You know, so I think that was the problem there. What Kathleen Kennedy should have been doing was working with Disney, deciding what are we going to do with this franchise? What do you want done with the franchise? And that's what a studio head would do. Studio heads don't meddle in the day-to-day affairs unless there's wildly over budget things happening. And like what happened with Solo, she got involved with that because Lawrence Kasdan was pissed. And that was something that I could totally understand. But so what did she do? She found a solution in Ron Howard, and Ron Howard and Lawrence Kasdan were contemporaries of one another. That was a fix, although I would like to have seen what Lord Miller would have done. But I think that her position has been misconstrued in terms of what it was she was expected to do. Everyone thought that she was like on one hand, the stuff that creatively worked, it worked because the creative team was like Andor. You know, she facilitated that. She expected the people that she hired. If you look at her plan, the people that she hired, like getting Colin Trevorrow coming from to do Duel of the Fates, and the plan that she had put together originally for the trilogy, the prequel or the sequel trilogy, was pretty good. It should have worked, but you had Carrie Fisher's death that derailed it. And then Colin Trevorrow suddenly became somebody that, he did really well in Jurassic World. That was a Frank Marshall production, but then he made this little film that didn't do very well. Can we entrust him to do that? So and there was moves that she made that she had to then recant and stop, like Weiss and Benioff were going to do a trilogy. Then Game of Thrones kind of tanked in its last season. So there was a lot of other things going around that she also had to contend with. So I think that what was great was when she had people like Tony Gilroy, who helped shape Rogue One. It was a genius move to have him come back and do Andor.
100%.
And I think that was something she did that was amazing. Now, getting Favreau to work with Filoni, that's what a studio head does. I want to put you creatives together. Now, Favreau, you got great ideas, but you should get together with our dude Filoni. That's what a great studio head does. And then they let their creatives go do things. And I think Mandalorian was a triumph in its conception. And the fact that they're making a Mandalorian movie is terrific. I hope the movie's terrific. Season 3 wasn't great, but I think season 3 wasn't great for other reasons. I don't blame Kathleen Kennedy. It exists at all because of her. And so I also think that the Obi-Wan Kenobi movie or series was, I think, a good idea. I think getting Ewan McGregor to come back was a great call, probably on her part. But again, I think the creative on that failed because they had to do things like bring in young Leia. This was probably a Disney call more than it was Kathleen Kennedy call, because again, she got the train out of the station, but I think she was, again, the people they hired to do that stuff, and that's what I blame her for, is that the creatives that they brought on to do a lot of these things were not necessarily up to snuff. But I understand getting somebody like Deborah Chow to direct. I get where she was coming from, although, didn't work out so well. But ultimately, I would say her tenure, and I will say this too, they had a lot of problems coming up with that Indiana Jones script. And I don't blame like Phoebe Waller-Bridge's involvement, and James Mangold was definitely a great choice to direct. I just think that there were probably too many things, too many that they wanted to touch on, like the direction they took Indiana Jones, I think was a bad move to make him sort of this sad sack guy. Indiana Jones is a badass, and he wasn't a badass in that movie. They made him this disgruntled college professor. I think that was a bad move. He should have been Gandalf the White, and a badass, and he wasn't. But I think that and the Willow TV series, my God, that was a complete disaster. Again, I think I blame the creatives of the show more than I blame her. What a missed opportunity that was. And yeah. Yeah.
We've gone on way too long on this. We're going to have to cut away. But guys, the question is for you. Now that Kathleen Kennedy is gone, let's take a moment and be objective. It wasn't however many years of just straight failure. There were high points. There were wins. We've never suggested that there wasn't. What to you were some of the highlights and some of the wins now that her era is done? Whatever you guys think, jump down to the comment section below and let us know your thoughts.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget, we have a daily podcast called the John Campea Show podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app of choice. Go and subscribe to it today so it'll be there when you need it.